by saying thank you for coming, thank you for joining me, and witnessing my first sort of presentation about my research. I've talked a little bit about my research earlier, but I'll give you a brief overview. I'm an exchange student to Eastern Mediterranean University from Eastern Illinois University in the States. And I kind of designed my thesis, my undergraduate thesis, around the idea of coming here to Cyprus because I knew about this direct exchange program. There's a whole funny story to that I can go into later, but I knew about this program and I've been wanting to come here for longer than I've even been in university. So I've had this plan in mind and I designed a thesis based on my majors. I am double majoring in political science and foreign languages, and those are also my passions. So what I'm studying here is the relationship between foreign language education, in this context, English education, and the promotion of peace values. And these are values like tolerance, empathy, critical thinking, analysis, things like this, that can be useful in community level peace building programs, what we call track 3. So not the high level politicians, not civil society, but just lay people, average people working to build this grassroots reconciliation program. And so what I did for my research was I combined both qualitative interviews with English instructors and classroom observations. I actually got the chance to observe 3 different classrooms, which was a whole process, had to do the permissions, letter to parents, letter to the teachers, everything. So I only did 3 of those, unfortunately, but got to talk to 12 instructors. 11 were from schools around here in Lefkoşa and Gazimagusa, but just one teacher, I'm very happy to have gotten the chance to talk with her. She was a Greek Cypriot teacher from a bicommunal school, the English school, on the other side in Nicosia. And through these interviews, what I did was I questioned the teachers on their use of English language media in their lessons, because I sort of naively came in thinking that, like the American system, teachers would be fairly free to do whatever they like for their lessons. And so what I was looking for was the evidence for teachers' implicit lessons by how they choose material, how they choose what to show their students, things like this. But what I found is that there's actually a very, very strict standardized curricula as far as the standard English courses go. So very little room for teachers to bring in outside material, things that aren't approved by the course book. There's a standard course book, teachers are kept on a very strict schedule, and so it's just much more practical, things like vocabulary, grammar rules, things that are very just cut and dry language. But in English literature classes, I found that teachers have much more freedom, and they do have a very different sort of curricula. Yes, they are obviously trying to promote proficiency through these classes, that's the whole goal, but they're also teaching their students to value different perspectives by using material from many different cultures. They're teaching students to critically analyze the source and the author of different material by teaching students to look first at who wrote this, where are they coming from, what context, what time period were these things written in. And they're also teaching students through just general arts inclusion to develop stronger senses of empathy and tolerance for others. And of course, these are very, very valuable peace-building skills. And what I found is that while in the standard English courses, there was no hidden curriculum really, it was just language. In the English literature courses, in which they were using different materials like books, novels, poetry, movies, all these different things, that they were actually teaching more than just the language. They were teaching students skills that they took into other areas even. I had many subjects, the English literature teachers, tell me that their students did better in other courses, like in history or civics or political courses, because of the lessons that they were taught, like critical analysis and positive thinking. And I found that to be so interesting and very telling of the relationship between the arts, foreign language, and the promotion of community level peace building. So that was the brief nutshell version of what I've been working on for about 2 years now. I have done a lot of independent study leading up into this. I work with a faculty mentor in Eastern Illinois University who I've been studying under for, I think this next semester will be the 4th semester. So that means I've done a lot of work on the theory behind peace building, on the localization of different missions. So taking authority back from the elected officials, from politicians, from international directors, and really giving it to the people that it's going to affect the most. And this theory is localization, and I've done a lot of research in this, and that led me to one of my absolute favorite authors, Anna Obora. She wrote a book on the reconstruction of national curricula in Rwanda, after the genocide in Rwanda. There was an entire curriculum overhaul across the entire country. They rewrote national curricula explicitly to promote peace. And one of the biggest things that they emphasized, besides social education, was foreign language. And that's what got me thinking about the relationship of foreign language education and arts to promote peace building in areas that are divided by ethnicity, by national identity, and by language, as in the case of Cyprus. So it's obvious, of course, to everyone that lives here how important English is in peace building, because without it, it's very difficult to communicate between both communities. But what I've found is that it's not just the language, but the other values that are promoted through literature-based classes that can really help facilitate these kind of reconciliation programs.
Was your age group, what age was your classes that you attended?
I looked in both middle school and high schools, so from ages of about 12 till 18.
And was this like state schools in TRNC?
In both, actually. I was in, let me think, the Turkmarif College. Yeah. I looked in the Famagusta College and the one here in Lefkoşa. I also went to Çanakkale Ortaokul, which is public school, and then the English school is private. So I did get a pretty diverse array, and the 3 classroom observations that I was able to conduct, one was in the middle school, one was in the, 2 were in the Turkmarif College, and between those 2, one was a junior level, so students that were between 16 and 17, a class size of about 20 students, and one was with seniors and only 2 students. So a very broad array of classroom situations, and I was able to see how the teachers were conveying these messages through their lessons in every situation.
And I would like to know what books they were reading or what kind of literature.
Well, that depended very much on the individual teacher. In the classroom that I mentioned with only 2 students, the teacher actually let her students pick the subject matter. And of the 2 that they were allowed to pick, they chose science fiction as one of them. So they actually read Frankenstein and went into a very deep analysis of Mary Shelley's life, her work, her perspective, the kind of messages that she was trying to send through the narrative. And I thought that was very telling in the way that, when you take a literature lesson, you're not just reading the literature, you're learning so many different other skills through it.
That's true. I can compare, for example, the education system in here with in Cyprus and Germany, like where the language is dominated German and most of the people are German. It's very much difficult for international students to adapt in that community. And here, that language is English and most. Like Cypriots and international students have to come together and have the same barrier as English is for most of the people. Foreign language is much more easier. Like, yeah.
I agree. There's a much more communal effort to learn in foreign language classes, I think. Because it doesn't matter what your background is,
Exactly.
it's going to be a third or even fourth language to many of these students. So there's a different sense.
Exactly, and even some people like they have English as native, like you when you are coming. The topic of combining language with racism is much less here because actually those who are from different countries they have the upper hand because they have this advantage of being fluent and native as in English. So which is not in Germany. The racism of knowing German or not knowing German, being born there or coming later, is very dominant, very strong to be discriminated at the university by professors.
I think that is a very unique thing about Cyprus is that it is so very multicultural.
True.
While we're still retaining a very unique identity, I found that Cypriots in general very welcoming of international students and scholars, and I find that is a very strong bonus for their community, of course.
That's true. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I would like maybe to do it integrated with psychology, my major. This is in peacemaking with positive thinking, and that other one was. I mean, we need to talk later. It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
Could be article, could be thesis, could be something also related to my major.
Right.
Giving people another perspective of thinking.
And even back in Nigeria, English is kind of like this glue that keeps everyone together because there's so many languages, but we're all taught in English. I can't imagine what it would have been like without.
Exactly, and that was really the point that Anna Obora made in talking about how the curriculum was changed to promote foreign language. They promoted both English and French as the unifying national languages, and that's what first got me thinking about English as a unifier between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots in this hypothetical united Cyprus in the future. Of course, and this is the sentiment shared by many English teachers that I spoke with. Of course, the first thing that students should do is learn each other's language, but as an aid to that, English proficiency is the number one key to bicommunal reconciliation.
Yeah, true.
But that's on the premise that people want reconciliation. I worked in the private sector here, in a private school, and there, even though we were following the UK curriculum, what the head and the staff followed was a very Turkish-centric directive from the Ministry of Education. So here I come, having had a Cypriot Turkish upbringing, but in London, I go into a classroom with very progressive ideas, and then I'm told you can't really, you have to follow this structure, this pathway. And for example, the language we spoke was English, and in the history lesson, which was predominantly the history of Islam, I struggled because I was like having to teach a religious ideology, and I thought, how can I give this an international context?
And that's really where I suppose I should have made this clarification about the implicit lessons taught through English literature classes. Of course, there are the values, the peacebuilding values, but then also the critical thinking skills that students can take into other classes that allows them the capacity, I guess I could say, to start to question those narratives. Like, many of my subjects, they told me about how very nationalized history and civics education is, but how her students, through English literature analysis, have the skills to start to question the validity and question the perspective of those lessons, and that they often end up doing much better in all areas of their education because of these skills.
I mean, the children were very conscious that the island is divided, and they see the South as a foreign country. And one day we were looking at the map and the Islamic spread over the Middle East, and then so the map had Turkey and then Cyprus. And then this is where the kids were like, well, did Cyprus, because Cyprus was included in the Islamic Empire, and so then it was like, well, how did we get to be divided today, miss? So that was my opportunity to sort of like break down some, you know, constructed ideology from parents and family. And that the kids loved that, because they were actually like seeking to understand, what is it? How did we get to live in a country where we have to show a passport or an ID to go to the other side?
May I ask what age group?
They were 10.
10, goodness, so they probably hadn't had much history before this.
Well, the history that they're fed is a very
It's just
established
Turkish.
ideology, yeah.
Interesting. And may I ask what year this was?
This was, I was there from 2016 to 2018.
Oh, wow, fantastic.
And I'm still in touch with some of the students.
Interesting.
You know, and even, I was a year teacher, so even with the things, English, literature, I would also look to use video and films that would give them a different narrative to the one that they're just experiencing here.
Right, that's exactly what I was searching for, was the teacher's initiative in introducing students to different perspectives.
Yeah, it's very important.
Absolutely.
Very important.
Oh, can I answer any other questions right now?
Since the time we had a conversation at Excel, it kind of got me thinking about, because my dad left here as the war was pretty much just got going, and he didn't speak English at all. So he went to the UK into like a predominantly like Turkish community to work and basically to escape the war. And this got me thinking a lot about how, because obviously he's not educated, he left school early because there was a choice back then. You either go to work because, you know, they were very poor, or you stay in school. Like his brother actually was a lecturer at the like things. So, you know, so one of the family members went to university and the other three, they kind of, exactly, yeah. So this kind of got me thinking about growing up in English education system where perhaps the language was never like a barrier for me, because I grew up like with English pretty much being my first language. But I think when you don't have that opportunity and you live in a place like, you know, if I came to Cyprus and I didn't speak proficient Turkish, then I would have more trouble. But I guess the way that I kind of see it is the fact that English has this amazing kind of literature and stuff that it actually kind of, you know, is missing a little bit, I guess, in especially places like Cyprus, in a way, like how much that encourages to actually, like you said, to think in a different way with a different perspective.
The broad scope of literature that has been translated into English or was originally written in English really does offer students such a broad array of perspectives to connect with and to start to develop empathy for, I think.
Do you think that has a, like, I guess because I'm thinking I've been here 4 years, and in that time, yes, Cyprus is infinitely more multicultural than when I first arrived. And there's much more people here from, you know, a lot more different places. But I guess having English language here impacts Cyprus in a kind of different way, in that, you know, especially with me, my Turkish is pretty good. But whenever I meet Cypriot, especially Turkish Cypriots, they usually want to speak back to me in English, almost like to practice.
Right.
There's this kind of like opportunistic, let me practice my English with you.
No matter how much we're trying to practice. I do notice
I'm
that.
learning Turkish, and whenever I speak to Turkish people, they always speak back to me. I'm like, no, indulge me.
Yeah. Please, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess having English here, has been kind of like, it's an extra opportunity for people to even communicate.
Absolutely.
Which
to
is
connect,
kind of, yeah.
Because it is the lingua franca right now of the world. It's very useful. And a lot of people that I've talked to about this express the concern that emphasizing English as a foreign language so much is almost a form of neocolonialism, that emphasizing this literature over even Turkish literature in schools is detrimental to local culture. But I think in the perspective of, people actually are going through these lessons are maybe an hour or two a day maximum, and then they spend the rest of their days in Turkish. I think this really doesn't pose as much of a threat compared to the benefit that can be gotten through its utilization.
Did you notice a lot, like, bring it back to Cyprus again, but from going from the south to the north, do you see a lot of kind of different approaches to teaching? Especially, I guess, we could go into history and that kind of thing, but I guess in general.
Absolutely. Well, let me preface this by saying that the only experience I had in a school on the south side was in a bicommunal private school, and that I was not able to attain access to any other schools. Obviously, being a student here, having a residency permit here in the north, was not smiled upon when I crossed over. So all of the information I have about the differences in the school systems are from professors, from teachers here, even from my Greek Cypriot interviewee then. But what the resounding message I received is that the Northern Cypriot Teachers Union, there we go, is much, much more liberal, much more progressive, and on average much younger than that on the south, because of how they structure placements, I suppose. I don't have enough information about the actual bureaucracy of it, but the impression I got is that because in the south the position is almost guaranteed. If you can get a position as a teacher, you are not going to be kicked out of it. It really does not encourage teachers to look for ways to develop professionally. And they often hold very conservative views on average about education, about history, and about teaching. That they'll have the same lesson they've taught for 30 years and not think to adapt it. Whereas in the north, teachers are much, much more encouraged to seek professional development, and on average, the union is much, much more liberal, and so that, of course, impacts their teaching practices.
Do you think you see like there's more of like there's like a line in the Cypriot educational system that because they're in the EU and they're more kind of accepted, that they have more of a wider I don't want to say scope, but like opportunity to kind of like.
But they don't.
But
in the south, the church has a real grip.
Yeah, that's what I mean though, because there's like a hard line.
But no,
because they have that connection to the religion.
It's really weird. They're in the EU, where you would think that they would be more progressive, they would be more liberal, they would be more adventurous, they would be concerned about developing ideas about teaching, empowerment of their students, but the church has got such a grip on education that, even, and I think it's interesting because I would like to see the books, I'd like to see the books that are used here and on the south in terms of how it promotes the history, because I think each community has an agenda.
Absolutely.
And I think that agenda is tied up politically which is a shame because education should be beyond political ideology.
But unfortunately,
But it's
education
not.
is always.
But it's not. It's used as a tool to either keep people in their place.
This was something actually that I've done
Sorry.
a lot of research on, the rewriting of history textbooks. That was something that was written out in the original Annan. The settlement made reference to an eventual rewriting of history away from these very hyper-nationalist, antagonistic, us versus them kind of perspectives of the conflict, and towards something more holistic and more, I'm losing the words, but more progressive in its conveyance of history. And even following the failure of the Annan Plan and referendum, the Turkish Cypriot Teachers Union went ahead and adopted these books and adopted these new frameworks of ideals promoting peace values, promoting tolerance, and steering away from such overt nationalism, whereas the Greek Cypriot side never did. They maintained that incredibly hard-line perspective on history, civic, and political education.
Can I give you an experience that I had last weekend?
Please do, please.
Can you stop filming?
Can I just say
Oh, sorry.
something because she stepped on my point?
No.
What I mean by accessibility is that because of the educational and the fact that they're in Europe, the kids there have a lot more opportunities to go and study abroad, and I think that the actual progressive thing I see about the Turkish educational system is that they are having maybe more opportunities to do, maybe read books they weren't being able to read pre-74, or maybe, I don't know, maybe before the 90s, because those kids, because it's a poorer, you know, in terms of people actually getting the opportunity to go and study abroad, you know, their chances are much more limited. That's what I meant by when I said they have more of a connection to the you know, the rest of Europe and the world.
They have a much more practical opportunity, but what I see is that the general spirit among Turkish Cypriot students is much more conducive to traveling abroad, studying abroad, having a more open worldview.
But that's also driven by the necessity for a good education and also aspirations for a better life, and also what I've witnessed since I've been here, because the island is divided, there's a lot of proactive support for students from TRNC to go abroad. You know, so in a way, being a divided island works towards their advantage.
Encouraging them to really explore further. I do see that, absolutely.
Yeah. I know lots of young people that have left Cyprus to study abroad and then question, can they come back to live here because of the mess that it's in?
Yeah.
A creative mess, I must add.
Right. Of course, I hope that more students
Yeah,
come back,
so do
because
I.
that is the whole perspective this project took, was
Yeah.
looking at new generations,
Yeah.
students who are going to enter into civil society
Yeah.
and hopefully make some difference in the conflict.
So is your paper online to read in full?
It
will
will
be.
be.
Okay.
Hopefully soon. I seek to present at a few different research conferences that I've been accepted to. One in April, a political science conference, and one in March, just a national undergraduate research conference. But following that, when I do get it into a finalized paper version as a thesis that I defend for my graduation, I will distribute copies to everyone that I've interviewed, everyone that has helped me reach these interviews, and if you'd like, you as well.
Thank you.
So, thank you again so much for coming. This was a wonderful first opportunity to talk about something that is so passionate about. I really am excited to be here and do this research.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.